I happened to overhear it by accident. One evening, as I returned home, I stopped in my tracks when I heard a low voice coming from the living room. That day we were preparing for a Christmas party with my husband's family. I had just come back from picking basil from the garden when I heard that low voice coming from the living room. It was my husband's voice. Normally calm and gentle, his voice sounded cold and ruthless at that moment. I can't believe I married that ugly woman. When I heard those words through the wall, I felt as if my heart had frozen. The ugly woman my husband was referring to was none other than me. But who on earth was he saying such cruel things to? Peeking through the gap in the door with trepidation, I saw something that made me doubt my eyes. Sitting across from my husband and nodding along was his sister, Catherine. The two of them continued their conversation, completely unaware of my presence. Catherine swirled her wineglass and whispered coldly to him, "You should divorce her before you have kids." My husband nodded and replied, "Oh, of course. But only after we get her family to buy us a vacation home." Catherine and him insulted me and discussed their future plans as if I had never existed. Suddenly, everything went dark before my eyes, and my legs gave way. I couldn't believe it. My beloved husband and my dear sister-in-law were having such a conversation behind my back. I stifled my sobs and left the scene with trembling hands. My chest felt like it would burst and I could barely breathe. The conversation was replayed over and over in my head as I ran dazed out of the house. I met my husband 3 years ago through a friend's introduction. I was drawn to his sincerity and kindness, and after dating, we got married. At the time, I was truly happy from the bottom of my heart. He had just started his own business, and although his income was unstable, I wanted to support him. After our marriage, I worked full-time and covered most of our living expenses while quietly supporting his business. It was all out of love. His dreams coming true was my own happiness. As for Catherine, I had always believed we had a good relationship. She is 5 years older than my husband and already has her own family. To me, she was like a real sister, and even after marriage, I thought we had built a good family relationship where I could often turn to her for advice. I also remembered my parents. When we got married, my parents offered financial support. I don't mean to boast, but compared to others, my parents are undoubtedly financially well off. They helped us in many ways, including paying the down payment for our new home and thinking of our future. I even remember them joking once, "One day, we'll give you two a beautiful vacation home." I laughed it off saying, "Oh, that's too much." But my husband replied with a tone that was hard to tell if serious or joking, "Well, if that day comes, I'd be grateful." Never did I imagine that he had taken it seriously and was acting with my family's wealth as his target. The moment I overheard the conversation between my husband and Catherine, something inside me crumbled. My beloved husband and the sister-in-law I trusted, the two people I valued most in my life, hurled words of insult and betrayal at me. No tears came, but I couldn't stop shaking. I ran outside and collapsed at the front door, unable to stand. Words like ugly woman and should divorce her swirled around in my head. What shocked me most was that the voice insulting my appearance was my husband's. It's true, I'm not a glamorous beauty like Catherine. But I believed my husband when he said he loved me, including who I was inside. To think that deep down, he was calling me that ugly woman. The sorrow and frustration nearly tore my heart apart. After a while, I somehow managed to stand and wiped away my tears. I had the urge to rush back inside and confront the two of them in a fit of emotion, but I stopped myself at the last moment. I instinctively felt that if I let my emotions take over and accuse them without proof, they would make excuses and manipulate the situation. I don't clearly remember what happened afterward, but I finished the Christmas party as if nothing had happened. Most of the preparations were already done, so I just chatted with the family like usual and went home. My husband went to his night shift job, so I was alone that night when I returned. I won't just sit by and let myself be betrayed like this. Muttering in a hoarse voice, I wiped my tear-stained cheeks with my sleeve. Even on the edge of despair, a quiet determination began to grow inside me. Over the next month, I kept up the appearance of normalcy while quietly taking action behind the scenes. First, I organized the voice recording I had secretly taken that day as solid evidence of their conversation. Next, I checked the balance of our joint account. My bad feeling was right there were large withdrawals I didn't recognize in the passbook. The dates were just the previous week. The amount taken out totaled $10,000. Of course, I had no idea about it. It was clear that my husband had moved money without my permission. But for what purpose? The word vacation home flashed through my mind. Perhaps the plan for my parents to buy us a vacation home had begun to take shape without my knowledge, and my husband had jumped the gun and prepared a down payment. Or maybe he simply transferred it to a secret savings account under his own name. Either way, this was proof that my husband had begun to betray me financially as well. After that, I began observing my husband's schedule very carefully. To start with, I searched his smartphone and laptop for any possible clues. Fortunately, my husband was not tech-savvy, and his accounts on the shared laptop were still logged in automatically. With trembling fingers, I opened his email inbox and found several suspicious exchanges. The sender was Catherine, and while the subject lines were disguised as work-related matters, the content clearly contained insults toward me and references to things they were doing behind the family's back. I'll casually mention next week's thing to her. The rest is up to you. When I read that message, the screen blurred with rage. From other undeleted fragments, I could also tell that my husband had been speaking ill of me to Catherine. Apparently once a week, he went out under the pretext of a business meeting, and each time, he and Catherine were scheming something together. I carefully took screenshots of each message and backed them up to a separate USB drive. Just in case, I also photographed the key emails and messages with my phone. Next, I tracked the movement of the money that had been withdrawn from our joint account. Through online banking statements, I found out that the $10,000 had been transferred to a personal account under my husband's name. He was likely trying to secure funds for himself in preparation for a divorce. Grinding my teeth at his cowardice, I still remained calm and kept documenting everything. Alongside gathering evidence, I decided to consult a trustworthy lawyer. Emotionally devastated by the sudden betrayal, I felt I needed professional guidance. Through a referral, I visited a law office and told the attorney everything that had happened. My voice trembled with tears as I laid out all the evidence I had collected on the table. The lawyer listened with a solemn expression and nodded. Then he said, "You have a solid case. Let's prepare thoroughly." Those words were a huge relief to me. From a legal standpoint, I could sue my husband for verbal abuse and financial misconduct. And we needed to find out why he was so close with Catherine in the first place. I nodded silently and began discussing the strategy with the lawyer. Based on his advice, the first thing I did was protect my assets. To prevent my husband from withdrawing any more of my money, I transferred all remaining funds from the joint account into one under my name. I left just enough money in the joint account to avoid raising suspicion and prepared an excuse like, I moved it to a fixed deposit for investment. In addition, I organized records of our income and expenses during our marriage, including proof that my funds were used for his business, such as bank transfers and receipts in case we ended up in divorce mediation or court. To my surprise, I was calm and methodical as I moved forward with preparing for separation. I didn't even have time to heal my broken heart, but doing anything helped me stay mentally stable more than wallowing in grief. And the most important step was contacting Catherine's husband, my brother-in-law. Catherine had been married for 10 years. Her husband was someone I had interacted with many times at family gatherings, and he had always been a calm and gentle man. I gathered my courage and called him, asking to meet in person. He must have sensed something from the tone of my voice, because he readily agreed to make time. In a quiet voice, I began, "I need to talk to you about Catherine and my husband." He looked surprised but seemed to realize from my serious expression that it was no ordinary matter. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and showed him some of the evidence I had prepared: transcripts of conversations between my husband and Catherine, overlapping outing records on suspicious dates, and messages insulting me. By the time he finished looking through everything, his face had turned pale and was soon distorted by anger and sorrow. "I can't believe my wife would do something like this," he muttered, barely audible. I could only nod through my tears. According to him, Catherine had been acting distant lately, and things had been tense between them. But he had never imagined that such disgraceful behavior was happening behind his back. Then came a shocking revelation from him. It turned out that my husband and Catherine were not biological siblings. Catherine was actually the daughter of my father-in-law's elder brother. Her birth parents had died in a traffic accident when she was 2 years old, and since my in-laws had no children at the time, they took her in and raised her. "I can't forgive this. We can't let those two get away with betraying us," my brother-in-law said with quiet determination. I looked up, startled. His eyes burned with anger and an even stronger resolve. And so, the two of us made a solemn vow to confront the traitors together and make them understand the weight of what they had done. The evidence was complete. The preparations were in place. I decided that the final act would be to reveal the truth in front of the entire family. I wanted to expose their shameful actions, which they had hidden for so long, under the light of day. On the surface, it was presented as a birthday celebration for my father. But in reality, it was the perfect opportunity to gather both sides of the family under the name of a family reunion. My brother-in-law agreed to fully cooperate, and the plan progressed smoothly. First, I suggested to my husband, "How about we have a dinner with everyone sometime soon?" Since we hadn't had a gathering in a while, I proposed inviting both families for a celebration. He looked surprised for a moment but replied, "That sounds like a great idea," looking rather pleased. I contacted Catherine myself and, of course, asked her husband to attend as well. Catherine responded without suspicion, saying, "I'm looking forward to it." She must have had no idea that her actions would be exposed. On the day of the dinner, we reserved a private room at a quiet restaurant in the city. My husband and me, my parents, Catherine and her husband, and my husband's parents were all present. It had been a while since the whole family was together, and a pleasant atmosphere filled the room as we raised our glasses for a toast. I smiled politely, though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My husband and Catherine showed no signs of nervousness and were even happily chatting. Seeing Catherine laughing and raising her glass beside my husband made my blood boil, but I held it in. After the main course was finished and just before dessert was served, I quietly stood up from my seat. "May I have a moment to say something?" Everyone at the table turned their eyes to me in surprise. My husband gave me a puzzled look and laughed. "What's this all of a sudden?" I looked him straight in the eye. In that moment, all fear and sadness vanished, leaving only firm resolve within me. Today is meant to be my dad's birthday celebration, but there's something else I need to tell you all. As I began speaking slowly, everyone looked confused. Only my husband furrowed his brows slightly, as if sensing something bad. Catherine, sitting next to him, tilted her head and smiled. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath and looked down at the table. "It's about you and my husband, Catherine." Silence fell over the room. My husband blurted out, "Huh?" in a foolish tone, while Catherine visibly paled and looked shaken. Despite my pounding heart, I continued to speak as calmly as I could. "I happened to overhear a conversation between the two of them recently." Saying this, I pulled out the notes I had taken from that day's conversation. My husband tried to reach for them, but my brother-in-law quickly grabbed his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Let her finish speaking." My husband's face was drained of color. Without hesitation, I opened the memo and read it out loud in a clear voice. As I finished reading, my mother let out a faint gasp from across the table. My father glared at my husband and Catherine with a furious expression. My husband's parents looked bewildered, staring at their son as if he were a stranger. As for the guilty parties themselves, my husband was sweating profusely, speechless, and Catherine's voice trembled as she muttered, "It's not like that, this is." With trembling hands, I pulled out my next trump card. It was the printed records of their messages and emails. "There's more. Please take a look at these." I quietly laid them out on the table and handed copies to my parents and my husband's parents. My brother-in-law stood up and spoke to Catherine in a calm but stern voice. "What the hell is this?" There was a hint of anger in his tone. Catherine flushed red and lowered her head, unable to respond. My mother scanned the email text with trembling hands, then broke down in tears. "How could you, really?" Beside her, my father supported her shoulder and, with barely suppressed fury, asked Catherine, "Is this true?" "Both of you, answer me." Pressed by my father, Catherine only shook her head and cried. But the emails were undeniable proof. There was no escaping it. Meanwhile, my husband desperately tried to make excuses. "It's a misunderstanding, it was just a joke," he murmured in a feeble voice. But I confronted him with a firm tone. Was calling me an ugly woman and planning to divorce me for my family's money also a joke? My husband was at a loss for words and looked around aimlessly. I continued, "You secretly withdrew money from our joint account. That fact is clearly shown in the passbook." With that, I presented copies of the bank transaction records I had prepared beforehand for everyone to see. "How exactly were you planning to use that $10,000 you took without permission? Care to explain?" When I pressed him, my husband's face flushed red as he shouted, "It's because you backed me into a corner. I just wanted to live with someone I truly loved." Everyone in the room was stunned by his sudden outburst. He roughly pulled back his chair and stood up, yelling at the top of his lungs, "Yeah, that's right. I was planning to divorce you. I've had enough of your ugly face. I only married you for your family's money from the start." Driven by rage and desperation, he revealed his true self in a flurry of shouting. Then he pointed at my brother-in-law and shouted again, "Your wife too. She knew everything and still went along with it." So what? As my husband approached my brother-in-law in a frenzy, the latter stood up quietly. His fists were clenched tightly, trembling with anger. His eyes were filled with both fury and disappointment. But he took a deep breath and spoke in a cold, dismissive tone. "You are despicable." That single sentence pushed my husband over the edge, and he lunged forward to strike. But in the next instant, my father and my husband's father each grabbed one of his arms and stopped him. "That's enough." My husband's father shouted, and my husband seemed to snap out of it and fell silent. What followed was a scene of utter chaos. My mother broke down in tears. My husband's mother stood frozen in shock. Catherine sat pale-faced, unable to say a word. With trembling shoulders, my father turned to her and roared, "You're just as disgraceful. I can't believe you behaved like that with your so-called brother." Then he turned to my husband and shouted, "Get out of our sight right now." My husband stood still, dazed for a moment, then eventually slumped his shoulders and muttered in a barely audible voice, "I'm sorry." With those final words, he fled the private room of the restaurant. Catherine, with tears streaming down her face, could only repeat, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." My brother-in-law didn't even glance at her. He simply said, "We need to talk when we get home," before calling the staff and silently paying the bill. And thus, after a long and hostile silence, the dinner ended in the worst possible way. Several days after the dinner, I began the official divorce proceedings with my lawyer. Since that day, both my husband and Catherine had been left completely isolated. First, about my husband after storming out of the restaurant, He tried to contact me several times. He called and emailed, begging for forgiveness, claiming it was a moment of weakness. But I had no intention of entertaining him. The total number of calls and emails reached 85. I told him, through my lawyer, that any further communication must go through legal channels. Since then, I haven't seen him in person. Later, his parents contacted me separately and offered a heartfelt apology for their son's behavior. They were not at fault, so I simply replied, "I appreciate the sentiment." In the divorce negotiations, I demanded the return of the $10,000 he had withdrawn without my consent. Although my husband initially resisted the conditions presented through the lawyer, we had undeniable evidence. Eventually, he admitted full responsibility and agreed to return the money. The final settlement also included a fair amount to cover my contributions to our living expenses and the support I had given to his business. While the financial settlement mattered, what was most important to me was never having to see him again and ending things properly. As for Catherine and her husband, their situation also sent shockwaves through the family. I heard that my brother-in-law sat down with Catherine as soon as they got home that day. Or rather, it was more of a confrontation than a discussion. A few days later, he filed for divorce. Even after 10 years of marriage, once trust is lost, there's no way to restore the bond. Catherine reportedly cried and begged him to stay, but he was resolute. He told her he wanted no property division or alimony and ordered her to leave the house. Naturally, their parents were furious and refused to let her set foot in their home again. My mother-in-law told her, "Take some time to cool your head," and pushed her away. Betraying her family and tearing apart 3 households, her actions were unforgivable. So what became of them after they got isolated? I officially divorced my husband and returned to my maiden name. I heard through the grapevine that my ex-husband fell into heavy debt from alimony payments and failed business ventures. After our divorce, he lost all the trust and connections he had through my family, and his business partners started pulling away. He became an outcast in the eyes of those around him and was tormented by loneliness. Shunned by mutual acquaintances and my family, the once confident man had completely faded. In the end, he was abandoned by everyone utterly, and quite literally, alone. Catherine's situation turned out just as miserable. After the divorce, with no one to turn to, she reportedly found it hard to remain at her workplace and eventually resigned. Rumors of her inappropriate remarks spread within the company, leaving her with no place to belong. She couldn't return to her family home, and now she's said to be living a modest life, relying on a friend. In any case, both of them lost their homes and their reputations as a direct result of the humiliation and betrayal they brought upon themselves. As for the vacation home, my parents ultimately purchased it under my name, and after the divorce, I became its manager. My ex-husband, having lost his dreams of a new life, apparently struggled to find a place to live and now resides alone in a cheap apartment. Some time has passed since then. At first, the emotional wounds ran deep, and I would often cry in the middle of the night. But with the support of my family, friends, and my former brother-in-law, someone who has now become a close and understanding ally, I gradually began to smile again. Determined to begin a new life, I threw myself into my work to rebuild myself. Fortunately, my boss and co-workers understood my situation and encouraged me, helping me move forward in my career. At one point, I felt like I had lost everything because of betrayal, but it also gave me the opportunity to realize what truly matters in life. Now, I manage the vacation home and spend weekends there with my parents and close friends. It's a quiet place by a lake where I once imagined sharing dreams of the future with my husband. But now it's different. Here, I have begun to envision new dreams. I replanted the flowers in the spacious garden and renovated the interior to suit my own tastes. I decided everything for myself, not relying on anyone, not clinging to love. Living on my own 2 feet, this strength, born from betrayal, now supports me. Of course, my emotional scars haven't fully healed. The fact that I was betrayed by someone I loved deeply will remain a pain buried in my heart for the rest of my life. Even so, it is only because I endured that pain that I am who I am today. I'm no longer afraid of the words "ugly woman" that my husband once threw at me. I now understand my own beauty and worth in my own way. They were the ones who judged others by appearance and trampled on kindness. And now I believe it is they who truly carried ugliness within themselves. Recently, I received a letter from Catherine. It was filled with words of apology and regret. She expressed deep remorse for what she had done and wrote that if one day she could be forgiven, she would like to rebuild our relationship as family. Honestly, I still cannot bring myself to forgive her. But if time can eventually heal this wound, then perhaps I will be ready to face her again when that day comes. Until then, I want to keep my distance. Meanwhile, I haven't heard a single word from my ex-husband since the divorce was finalized. According to mutual acquaintances, he has left town and now lives quietly somewhere far away. His business failed, his credibility vanished, and there is no sign of the ambition or vitality he once had. I feel no pity or sympathy for him anymore. I only hope that he realizes this is the result of the seeds he sowed. Life is unpredictable. This is a lesson I've learned firsthand. The sorrow of being betrayed by someone you trusted is immeasurable. But I stood back up and began walking a new path.